Now for the next one, this is where spoiler alert, I feel like this is going to be, we may disagree on this one. So
Maybe
we may disagree. This is actually a topic that I've put off talking about this one for a while, but fuck it, we're going to do it. And it won't, I have a feeling it might not be the last video of this nature that we do. We may talk about other divisions, but I feel like it's time to talk about who we think is the best featherweight in UFC history. Now, I'm not exactly sure about how to frame this one because we didn't talk about it beforehand. Are we just going to do just the UFC tenure, or are we going to kind of include the WEC tenure in this as well? I just wanted to make that clear before we get into this.
I mean, when I think of it, I do think of the WEC tenure, but if we don't include the WEC tenure, it changes my answer.
I'll tell you what we'll do then, yeah. We will frame it, because I'll be honest, yeah, even including the WEC tenure, it doesn't really change my answer that much. It's slightly different, but it doesn't alter it that much. So what we'll do is we'll include the WEC tenure as well. To make it, I want to be as fair as possible here.
Yeah, fair enough.
So yeah. You have.
So the greatest featherweight of all time to me is easily Jose Aldo Jr., Scarface. I mean, obviously everybody knows. I've said it many, many times, and a lot of different YouTube personalities, MMA media, whatever we call ourselves, kind of begrudge the fact that I think of title defenses so heavily. It's funny, Lucas Tracy brought up title defenses and how he doesn't count them as much as other people. And to me, I'm like, I don't know how you could not count them as much as other people. The reason I count title defenses so heavily is because typically you're either the main event. If you're not the main event, you're the co-main event. So that means that you're carrying the card. You have more media obligations. You have more publicity. You have more eyes on you. You have more requests from outside forces, being family, friends, whomever, that you have to be responsible for. You're fighting longer also. So, and you come out last when everything has happened. All the pressure is on you. And you're defending something that everybody else in the division wants. How can that not be weighed heavier than other fights? So, because of that, that always is going to weigh heavily into who I pick as the greatest of whatever. It's not the end all be all, because there's people who've beaten other fighters and it wasn't a championship fight. And I, consider that as well. But in this instance, Jose Aldo defended that belt way more than other people. Now, one thing that I think that people will look at is, well, who did he fight? Fair. That's fair. Because if you look at Alex Volkanovski, he fought another person who's considered in this conversation, he fought him 3 times. Maybe he didn't win all those, but he was very competitive in those regardless, and he got his hand raised. Max Holloway, his story isn't even finished. But for me, Jose Aldo, despite the fact that he lost to those 2 men, he was doing it far longer than what those men did at the top of their peak. And that's why I have him as number 1. For me, like, the only counter argument that you can put towards that is Alex Volkanovski at this point, because of the same thing that I'm saying is who he beat. So that's really kind of the only counter argument that I could see on that one. But for me, it's easily Jose Aldo.
Well, you kind of knew going into this one that I was gonna wholeheartedly
I did.
disagree with you. And I mean, and the thing is that you know how much I love Aldo. I mean, like everyone who was watching practically saw me soil my pants when he beat the brakes off Jonathan Martinez. Like I can't remember a time when I was that excited in a long time watching a fight. Probably with the last time I was that hyped watching somebody beat the piss out of somebody who was watching Sean Strickland beat up Izzy. It's a very similar type. That's how big it was for me. I think you raised a really good point at the start there. You know, when anyone brings up who is the best discussion, and we've talked about it enough times, it's very, very subjective and it is about what you favor. So you brought up so I kind of see when you're considering who the best is, I think about it as the way you win, the length of time you were on top, and the amount of defenses you have, or the competition you were facing. So you obviously place how long you were at the top and the defenses as number one. For me, number one is who you've beaten, then it's how you beat those people, and then it's how many times or how long you stayed on top. And that's a very subjective thing. Like I don't begrudge you for having that opinion that that's what you favor, because it's a very valid way to frame a best of a who's the best in a division argument. And I considered this in Aldo's WEC run as well. I think the level of competition and how he won doesn't really stack up as highly as even Holloway or Volkanovski. So kind of, and you brought up his CV, which I think is very, very reasonable. I mean, he beat Cub Swanson, killed him in 8 seconds. He beat Uriah Faber, who for me was kind of undersized as a featherweight. Very, very good fighter, but very undersized. He beat Kenny Florian, who's a good fighter, but he's not really considered in the top 10. He beat Chad Mendes twice. I mean, the first time he starched him, and then he had an outright war with him in a very close second fight, which some people thought he lost. I don't think he did, but it was a very close fight. He beat Frankie, and he beat a prime zombie. One went the distance, one was a starching. Then he gets starched by McGregor, and then loses comprehensively to Max twice. Comprehensively. He was beaten soundly in both those fights. Now, if you look at Max in comparison, he beat Clay Collard, who's still doing his thing. He beat Cub as well. He's got Charles Oliveira on his CV, who I'm willing to kind of forego because he was very drained for the division and he wasn't really a very good featherweight. He beat Lamas. He starched Anthony Pettis. He beat Edgar as well. And then he absolutely destroyed Qatar, Ortega, and Rodriguez. Beat the fuck out of all three of them. So when I think about this kind of question, I think to myself, and I do think it is kind of relevant, I ask myself, if Qatar and Ortega and Rodriguez were operating in the WEC era, how well would they have done in that division? And I would argue that they'd be very, very competitive in that era. And I think they stack better than Aldo's wins do in the WEC. Now, if Max had beaten up an older Aldo twice, you could make a case that he caught him out of his prime and that he was younger and that he was just better. Aldo is still as good as ever and went on to have great wins. And I kind of think of it as, if I put a prime Max against a prime Aldo, who do I think would win? And I'm not saying it would be startling. I would favor a prime Max in that situation. I think it's a fairly reasonable thing to say. Now, if we look at Alexander the Great, again, if you look at his CV, he flatlined Mendes. He beat Aldo convincingly. He beat Jeremy Kennedy, who not a lot of people know about, very underrated Canadian fighter who's doing very well I think he's in PFL now, or in Bellator, sorry. And he's had a very, very decent career. He also starched Zombie, starched Rodriguez, and beat Ortega too. So for me, he's got a very comparable CV to Max Holloway. They beat very similar guys, and they did it. You can argue that one guy beat their guys better than the other. So it kind of comes down to the obvious tiebreaker, which you mentioned. They've both fought 3 times. Now, again, the first 2 fights, very, very close. And I've watched both those fights dozens of times. They were very, very close. I think you could make a, if I'm being honest, I would say it was probably 1-1. I gave Volkanovski the first fight, and I thought Max Holloway edged the second fight. I think he got slightly robbed in the second fight. But they were both razor close fights. You can make an argument for both of them. For me, what kind of killed it in my mind was obviously two things. In the third fight, Volkanovski destroyed Holloway. Nobody has ever done that to Max Holloway at featherweight. Nobody. Destroyed him for 5 rounds. Secondly, as well, Max has gone on to prove that, if anything, he's gotten even better over the years. You've seen what he's just done to Justin Gaethje. This guy has improved incrementally as well. And for Volk to do that in the third fight against him is a testament to his IQ and how much he improved as well. Volk has lost once at featherweight in his entire career, and that was after getting KO'd upper weight class against the guy he shouldn't have jumped off the couch to fight in the first place. So for me, when you consider the competition, who he's beaten, how he's beaten them, and his one loss coming under the circumstances that they came in, for me, Alexander Volkanovski is the greatest featherweight of all time, as things stand. But the thing is, if Max fights Topuria somewhere down the line and somehow beats him, again, it opens the whole thing up. But I've got it. Alex first, Max second, Jose Aldo third. Before you can talk about anybody else.
Yeah. No,
it's those three.
I don't think that you're wrong. I don't. It's really hard. Those three, I feel like this might be the hardest division to pick who you think is the greatest of all time in, because of those three men and what they did in the division, and the significant drop off before you get to 4. I mean, who is 4? Uriah Faber from WEC, if you're counting that. Like,
I think that's what the general consensus is. I mean, you've got some nut riders who will say it's like Conor McGregor, which is ridiculous. He's not in the conversation. It would probably be Uriah Faber.
I think when I did mine, what was it, last year? I think I had Faber 4. I had Conor at 5. But that was really, I had Conor at 5 just because kind of lack of people to choose. I mean, I could have thrown Chad Mendez at 5, to be honest. I mean, but like, Max can wipe all this. He can wipe all this out. He can wipe all that out. If he can beat Topuria, man, if he beats Topuria and defends the title, I don't even know if he needs to defend it twice. If he beats Topuria and defends it once against whomever, maybe Volk, who knows? But
I would say even that, like, him and Volk are very, for me, it was neck and neck between those two. And I think it was just that third fight that pushed it over the edge for me with Volk.
He did watch
because of the way that he beat him. But then it's like you said, if Max goes out and wipes out Topuria, I'd say he's back as the best featherweight.
It would be hard to argue that.
He has one.
It would be hard to argue.
I think that would be enough for me.
That to beat the man that beat that man, like, it does.
It means something.
Like, Max Holloway right now, he has the capability to really, really move up Goat Mountain.
Oh, 100%. I was about to say the same thing. Like, I would say if he gets 2 or 3 outstanding wins on his, he could creep onto Goat Mountain. Like, because I don't really think that, like, losses are that. It's the same way, because I mean, we talk about Addison Silva as potentially.
Yeah, dude's got like 11 losses.
And he lost a lot.
He did.
He lost a lot. You know, I think that 4th slot is still
Topuria could do it. He could get it himself.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's the guy. I mean, the only reason why we can't talk about Topuria now is because, as we know, he hasn't fought enough people. Like, in all the things that we consider important, who you beat, the way you beat them, he's basically he's got Volk on his CV pretty much, and he's the only elite fighter that he's beaten, really, at that level. He's beaten some good fighters, but elite fighters, it's only Volk. But he could be one that we're talking about 3 or 4 years from now. Undeniable.
He needs scalps.
He needs people to beat, and that's exactly why I said to you, bro, that, like, who you beat and how you beat them is important. Because if he goes on in the next 4 years and he beats Allen, he beats Evdoev, do you know what I mean? He might not end up on GOAT Mountain just because the level of competition he's faced isn't strong enough to make that claim. That's why it stands as so important to me, because sometimes you're a victim of your era, you know, where the competition just isn't there to stand up against you, and he could be facing that.